Welcome to part 2 of the beginning pen making series. Today we're going to make a slimline pen. So the first thing we want to do today to make the pen is gather up our pen kit, our blank, and our bushings. And I'm going to show you what I'm going to use for those. This slimline pen, I've chosen a 24 karat gold pen kit. This is a very cheap pen kit. In advanced pen making, we're going to talk about platings and why it's good to spend a little extra money. There's a very good reason I chose this kit. It's the last one I have. The blank I'm going to be using today is a piece of cocobolo. Like I mentioned in video 1, cocobolo is a very easy to make, easy to use wood, and it comes out to a really nice finish. Just as I mentioned, this one doesn't look very good right now. It's kind of boring and plain, even a little dirty on one side. I bet it's going to turn out really nice though, because I can tell by looking at the end that it has some really nice grain and some streaks running through it. Lastly, I have the bushings. These make pen making so easy. When I first began, I didn't know these even existed, so I tried to measure everything, and it was a lot more difficult. It took a lot more time. With bushings, it goes really quickly. Now that we've got that stuff ready, I'm going to lay out the blank with the tubes. I'm going to cut it and drill the blank. So the first thing I want to do to get the blank ready is lay out the tubes. Now if the piece was much longer, I could determine where I want to cut it to use it. That way I can pick the most beautiful part of the wood. In this case, I'm pretty much at the length of 2 tubes, as you can see here. So I'm just going to make one cut on this. If there was a lot of extra, I would actually cut it twice to get the tube down. Now one thing you want to not do is cut it exactly the length of the tube. I don't want to line up that tube and put a mark and cut it right there, because that would leave me no extra for blowout and drilling or trimming back once the tube is glued in. Leave a little extra so that way you have something to work with. So the way this blank is sized, I'm going to leave a little on each end, and I'm just going to cut it right in the middle here. And this is one for each tube. Now one thing to keep in mind later, and we'll cover it with another pen build, is if the tubes were different lengths or thicknesses, you may need to choose how you cut the blank based on that. So you just saw me cut the blank on the bandsaw. Normally I'd use the miter saw. The bandsaw was a little closer, so I just went ahead and used that. You want one end with perfectly square ends, so that way when you put it on your drill press, you have a square end. Now I wasn't too worried about that, and the reason is, when I drill, I use this jig I made. This was a simple 2x2. You can pretty much see right away what I did. I put a hinge on the back, doesn't even fit right. And then I cut 2 diamonds, or squares, depending on which way you're looking at it, of 2 different sizes. And what that's for is 2 different sizes of pen blank. This one might be too small for this one, but fit perfectly here. And what I can do with this, the reason I wasn't concerned about the squareness of the end is, I'll put this in there and hold it on my drill press, and this jig will hold it perfectly square because I cut these square on the table saw. This is a really nice jig to make. It's very simple, and I've used this one I think about 2 or 3 years now. So I mean, they last a long time because they don't really get any abuse. I want to make my center point on this blank, and what I can use is a couple of different things. I can use a square and make a cross on each end and do it that way. But one thing that I have that's really nice, and you can get these a variety of places, I actually think this one I bought from another pen maker, is this little center finder. And they make large size ones. I've seen them at the wood stores. But this is a nice one for pen blanks because it's a little tiny guy. And all you got to do, put it on here, draw a line, flip it over, draw a line, drill on the cross point. So to make the hole for the tube, I'm going to drill with a 7mm brad point bit. Brad point is by far the easiest because it helps you line up that cross point and get it nice and centered. Brad point bits are the preferred pen maker bit. Got the blanks drilled and I'm ready to glue in the tube. One thing you want to do first, let these cool down. If you go ahead and glue these while these blanks are hot, your glue, when it hits that heat, will set off a lot quicker. There's been times where I've had the pen tube that far in, pushing it right in, and it just gets stuck because the glue sets off and you're done. Waste the pen blank, waste the tube. So now I'm ready to glue in my tubes. I always take a piece of sandpaper and just rough up the tube a little bit. I've heard people say, and I've seen posts online where people say it's not necessary. I've done this from the beginning. I've never had one fail, so I'm going to go ahead and keep doing it. The glue you're going to need is CA glue, acrylic. It's sold at a lot of hobby shops, hardware stores, wood stores, pen makers, supply websites have it. You can get it from a little half-ounce bottle up to a big 5-10 ounce bottle. I usually buy the big one and fill up my little bottle because it's easier to use. All I'm going to do, take the glue, spread a little bit on. Doesn't take a whole lot. And what I do is kind of twist it as I put it in. That's why you don't want it setting it off real quick. And then I just tap it in. And what that'll do is push the tube down just 1/8 of an inch, maybe 3/8, get some of the excess glue off, and then I can just pop that off the table. So again, spread the glue on. You kind of keep spinning it to keep it rolling around. I spin it on in and then just give it a little pop. And if it doesn't knock down in there right away, you can just give it a little tap on the other end and you'll see it kind of slide in there. And then we just wait for those to dry. So now that my blanks have dried, the glue is dried, I'm going to go ahead and square up my ends with my pen end mill. I got it in my drill press here. I've got my blank jig. I'm just going to simply hold this, turn on the drill press, and square up the end. And you just want to take this to where the pen end mill just cuts to the edge of the tube. You can see the tube's a little shiny because it was just starting to rub it. So I've got my two blanks, I've got my bushings. I'm going to load them up on the mandrel, get everything set up, and start to turn. On the Slimline, the setup for the bushing is bushing, workpiece, bushing, workpiece, bushing. All three of the bushings are the same. On other pen kits, they're very different, so don't assume that they're the same for everything. I'm going to slide the pen mandrel saver over the end here, get it nice and snug, lock down the tailstock, and then I'm going to just snug this up. And when I turn on the lathe, I'll be able to tell right away how tight this is if I need to tighten up the tailstock a little more. And lock her down. To turn this, don't forget your safety equipment. So now that I've got this cut down almost to the bushings, but not quite, I'm going to use my skew. You can see how dusty the Cocobolo is, and it's even a fine dust with that big gouge. So make sure you're wearing a mask at all times. This is where I'll do my final shaping. You can shape this any way you want. You can have it fat or thin, have ridges and cuts. I, on a Slimline, like a nice slim body. It's a small pen, so I don't like necessarily the fat, chunky pieces. If you do, it's your freedom to do it however you want. I'm going to go ahead and just taper this down. I don't have to get it perfect because we're still going to sand it. Now I'm just going to inspect the blank I'm going to spin my lathe and look at where my wood meets up to the bushings, how much space I've got. If I need to cut down a little more, the skew is a great choice. I don't want a lot there, but I am going to sand, so I can take off a little bit of material that way. This one, I'm a little high on a couple ends, so I am going to take off a little more with the skew. And as you get better with your tools, you'll be able to cut this in a way that it'll need very little sanding. This particular piece is going to need very, very little at all. What I'm going to use, I'm going to actually start this one with 320 grit. And you can turn on the lathe and have it spinning and sand it that way. In this case, this is so close, I'm just going to actually hand sand it with the grain, spinning my lathe on the headstock here. If I find a spot that I need to spin sand it, I can definitely do that because it takes off a lot more material in a quicker manner. But this will get it sanded with the grain very nicely. Make sure you pay attention where the wood meets the bushing. I'm now at 600. Now I'm to the point where I think I'm ready. I'm happy with the sanding. I'm happy with the fit on the bushings, which ultimately will be the fit on the pen. I'm going to do a quick wipe down with some mineral spirits, and I'm just barely going to use any. And all I want to do is get that dust out of there and show me exactly if I have any imperfections where they're at. And you can kind of see what the wood's going to look like once it's finished. Now I'm looking closely at the fit here on the bushings, and then of course the whole thing. I don't want any scratches or streaks. I want to make sure my sanding was primo on that. And this is looking really nice, and you can actually really see the grain pop out on this particular piece of wood. Before I put the finish on, I want to make sure that these mineral spirits that I just rubbed in are all dry and out of the piece. I'll turn it on for a second, spin it. Maybe even rub a dry paper towel over it just to kind of help heat it up and dry out that stuff before I put the finish on. Use is this Mylan's High Build Finish. In my eyes, this is a great bowl finish and other things. For pens, this is definitely the beginner's finish. It's very easy to use. It'll create a finish that is nice, long-lasting. It's not the premium finish that you will see in advanced pen making, but this is a great way to start. I've had this bottle since I started, and I've even given some away, and you see how long it lasts. You can also see that as it sits for any given time, it settles. So you want to shake it up. Just put a little dab on your paper towel or your cloth. I'm going to use paper towel. Shake it on there. You can see the finish on there. And basically I'm going to rub it in, and then I'm going to turn on the lathe, and that's where I'll get the friction part, and it'll build up. And I want to put a few coats on this, and it'll really create a nice, shiny, built-up finish on here. So now that my blanks are off the lathe, and I'm happy with my finish, here comes the best part of the pen making, the assembly. This is where you get to put it all together and see what you've got. So the first thing I'm going to do, guess I don't need those right now, is I'm going to take my pen kit out of the bag. They all typically come in the big bag like I showed in episode 1, and then you're going to want to take out each piece from the little bag within the big bag. I like to just set them out here so they're ready to go for assembly, and then I can begin the assembly process. What I'm going to use for assembly is my arbor press. This is just a cheap half-ton arbor press from Harbor Freight. It works great for pen assembly. Before I had this, I would use things like basic simple clamps or even wood clamps. Anything you can get the pressure on, because these parts are pressure fit and you want to push them together. So the first thing I'm going to do is decide which is going to be the tip end and which is going to be the upper end. Now this pen, I actually shaped the tip end, this one, on purpose a little thinner than the upper end. I think it just gives it a little more natural look to have the tip be a little thinner here. So the first thing I'm going to do is put in the tip here. Basically I'll put this, line it up, put it in my press, and press down. Now I don't want my nice metal finish of the pen, up against the metal here, so I'll use a piece of cloth or double or tripled up paper towel to just give it a little cushion. Set my arbor press so that the arm is up. I'm going to put the tip down, that way it gives me a little more control because I have the paper towel on the bottom here. And a couple of key things, whatever press you're using, when you do this, you want to make sure everything is nice and straight. You don't want to have your part started a little crooked because it'll just continue. When you get to acrylics, it'll definitely be critical because any slight variation or slight turn in the metal part will crack your blank. So what I like to do with this arbor press, it doesn't take a lot of pressure, is I'll just kind of push as I hold here to line it up. And I can see it's already pushing. I can rotate to make sure that I'm getting even pressure on all sides. And you can see it's already closing up. And it's pressed in nice and firm. So the tip is now in. Next part with the Slimline is pretty critical. This is the transmission which you'll install into the back of the lower tube here. The reason this is critical is this is where your ink loads. So your ink will go in and thread in, and when this transmission, which turns right here, is fully extended, that's where you need it to be in your pen lined up. So what I like to do is go ahead and line it up like this, seeing how much I'm going to have to push in. If it's more than this little dimple on the transmission, I'll make a mark with a pen. This one looks like it's going to be just about perfect at that line. So what I'll do is go ahead and press this in to the tube just before the line. I'll give it a try. If I need a little more, I can always push it in a little more. Obviously, you don't want to go too far because it's very hard, if at all possible, to get out. Now this one will not fit in my arbor press here because of its length, so I'm going to use this clamp. A traditional pen press would work in this situation. I just don't like them myself, so I don't use them. So I'm going to line this up, hold it in here nice and snug. Now this is a lot on me to hold it straight while I'm pressing, so you don't have the comfort of the pen press. Now what you can see is it presses in pretty easily when it's lined up. So I'm just before the dimple, and I'm right on it there. So now what I'm going to do, test the ink, and I want to see how far it is when fully extended and when backed up. Back up in the pen is no problem. When I extend it, I'm a little shy of being out to full extension. So I'm going to go ahead and press that in the rest of the way. And that looks pretty darn good. You can see in and out. So now the lower tube is ready. I'm going to go ahead and put the top part together. This is actually super simple on the Slimline because it has just one part to press. I'm going to align the clip with the tube like this, put the top cap in, get it lined up, and then simply press it in on my arbor press. Just like before, I'm going to use something to cushion so that my metal on metal contact doesn't scratch up my pen. Get it nice and lined up, and this is an easy press. Once I'm done, you can see the cap lines up nicely. One more step and we have a fully working pen here. Take the lower tube, slide the center ring over, then slide the top cap on, and we have a nice Slimline twist pen. This is a great simple pen. This will make a nice gift for somebody or just a thank you or something. But you can see the process today was pretty simple, and in the gold with the Coca-Cola we have a really nice looking pen here. Thanks for watching. Be sure and stay tuned for the next episode where we're going to build a cigar pen.